Okay, in this video it's basically part 2. We're going to look at some of the other negative impacts of inflation on living standards. So in this video we're going to discuss why inflation undermines efficiency and how resources are allocated, and why it can lead to higher interest rates. So basically inflation leads to higher interest rates for two reasons, and you've got to be able to talk about both of these. The first reason is that banks need to increase their interest rates to maintain their real rate of return on their loans. So basically what I'm saying is if the banks lent you money at an interest rate of 3%, but inflation's at 4%, then basically they're going to lose money on that loan, because when you pay them back, the money that you're paying them back gives them less purchasing power. So they need to keep their interest rates above the rate of inflation to protect their real rate of return. Their real rate of return, or the real interest rate, is the difference between interest rates and inflation. So at the moment, on say your average loan, you're paying a loan of say 5% on a home loan at the moment. Inflation's at about 1.5%, so the real rate of return for the bank is 3.5%. So the banks need to increase their interest rates when inflation is higher to protect their real rate of return, so that they're getting more money in interest than the rate of inflation. That's one reason why interest rates go up when inflation is high. The second reason is that when inflation is high, the government is looking to slow the economy down. It's trying to reduce the level of demand so that we don't have high inflationary pressures, and therefore we lose our competitiveness. So the second reason they will raise interest rates is to try and slow consumption spending, because we know higher interest rates reduce consumption spending because people have less discretionary income and they're less willing to go into debt, and investment spending falls because firms don't want to go into debt. So they will raise interest rates to reduce aggregate demand. And basically, higher interest rates reduce our living standards because people have less discretionary income and less money to spend on other goods and services. So one reason we don't want high inflation is it can lead to higher interest rates. You want to be able to explain why it leads to higher interest rates? The two reasons: to slow the economy down and to protect lenders' real rates of return, and why high interest rates are bad for the economy, and that's because it reduces our discretionary income. The difference between nominal and real interest rates is the rate of inflation. So nominally, say interest rates are at 5%, that's the nominal rate. If inflation's at 2%, the real interest rate would be 3%. This is the hardest one. Inflation undermines the efficiency in resource allocation. Now what we mean by that is, if you own resources, so if you own land, labour and capital, you're going to allocate your resources to where you can make the highest profit. When we have periods of high inflation, basically the prices of things like shares, property and gold, artwork, collectibles, things like this, what we call speculative assets, often go up by the most. So basically there's higher capital gains to be made when there's high inflation by investing in these areas. So more people or more individuals will invest in shares, property and other assets when inflation is really high, because that's where they're going to get the highest real rate of return. And the problem with that is resources move into these industries and away from things like business investment and expanding, which helps to expand our economy. So basically they go into these industries, and these areas don't help to create jobs. Investment spending creates jobs. People have to build the new infrastructure, we buy machinery, we buy capital, that helps to create jobs. But these types of investment don't create jobs. So we don't want people investing in these areas, but inflation causes more investment in those areas. So resources move away from business investment into more speculative assets, and that undermines efficiency in resource allocation, and because we're not investing and boosting our productive capacity, it can lead to slower growth in the long term. So first reason it leads to inefficiencies is that we invest more in these things that don't grow our economy and less in things like investment spending, which is good for boosting our growth. Other reasons that undermines efficiency in resource allocation is that it often makes the price or the market mechanism less effective. Now what I mean by that is, if you're, for example, an economic agent, say you're a producer, you want to shift your resources to where you're going to make the most profit. So if it's bananas or apples or oranges, you want to be shifting your resources into that area if there's high demand. But if inflation is occurring and prices of everything go up, it can basically make business owners unsure of where to shift their assets. They're not really sure if they should be shifting assets into that area because there's more demand or they're higher quality products, or they're just going up because of inflation. So it can lead to, another reason it leads to inefficiencies is that it distorts the price mechanism and makes it hard for businesses to know where to allocate their resources. Another reason it's inefficient is that we often consume too much in the short term. Because we know prices are going to go up and the real value of money is going to go down, people will consume more now and save less because they know, or they'll invest less because they know that they're better off spending now before prices go up. And that can be bad for the future because we have less money for investment, which can hurt our future living standards. Another reason it undermines efficiency is that it encourages borrowing and discourages savings or lending, particularly if you're doing it at a fixed interest rate. If you think that inflation is going to go up, you'll be more willing to borrow at a fixed rate because when you're paying back, it's less in real terms. But in the real world, generally interest rates will rise and fall in line with inflation. But these are some of the reasons that it undermines efficiency. One, we put resources into these speculative assets and away from investment spending. Two, firms don't know where to allocate their resources because the price mechanism gets distorted. Three, it leads to more current consumption and less investment spending. They're the three main reasons it undermines efficiency. Other problems with inflation, and these are just some different things, they can cause what we call a wage price spiral. And what I mean by that is if inflation increases, people's real wages are falling. So the amount of money that they're generating in income in real terms goes down and they have less purchasing power. So what do workers do? They demand a higher nominal wage to protect their real wage. And because we're demanding a higher real wage, businesses increase their wages, their production costs increase, and that leads to higher prices again. So it's kind of like this process of increased inflation, real wages go down, employees ask for an increase in their nominal wage, therefore firms' cost of production go up, and therefore we raise prices again, and the process keeps going. Prices go up, so people demand a higher nominal wage again. It is less prominent today now that the government's not setting as many wages and they're more decentralised or they're tied to productivity growth, but it still happens a little bit. Basically the cycle. Increased consumer spending and higher costs of production leads to inflation, so people demand higher wages, that leads to higher costs of production for firms, so increased inflation, that leads to workers demanding higher wages, that increases costs of production, that leads to inflation, and so on and so forth. The other thing is inflation can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, and I'll finish this video here, because basically people predict inflation is going to occur, so what do? Well, they demand a higher wage, or they spend more now to avoid higher prices. So when people predict inflation, workers demand higher wages and consumers spend more today, and both of those lead to increased demand and increased inflation. So we predict inflation, we do two things. We spend lots more money before it occurs, and we demand higher wages, and both of those things cause either cost push or demand pull inflation. And then inflation becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We'll talk about these concepts as well in class. Thank you.